I'm Mani Khanuja, Principal Generative AI Specialist Solutions Architect at AWS, and I've co-written 2 books on building and scaling these systems in production. So you send a question off to a model, and then you sit there watching a cursor blink at you. And it genuinely does feel like there's something on the other side thinking about your question, doesn't it? It isn't. For a good part of that wait, your request isn't being computed at all. And the parts where something is computing are doing 2 completely different jobs that just happen to look identical from your side of the screen. Last time we worked out that inference is a meter that never stops running. So today we're going to open up one single request and find out where all of that time is really going. And by the end of this, you'll be able to look at a slow system and say which part of it is slow, which I'd argue is a completely different skill from knowing that it's slow. So here's that request again, this time from the top. One user, one question, one answer making its way back. The first thing that happens is a network hop. Your request leaves the user and arrives at your serving stack. And that's usually a few milliseconds you will never once think about again. Then it queues. And I'd like you to sit with that one for a second because this is where an enormous amount of time quietly disappears and almost nobody goes looking for it. Your request is waiting for the GPU to have room. Nothing is being computed, nothing is being generated. So how much of your latency budget has just gone? Potentially an enormous slice of it, and not 1 millisecond of that will ever show up in a model benchmark because benchmarks don't queue. But your user's clock started the moment they hit enter, right? And they have no idea that any of this is happening. Then the model reads your prompt, which we call prefill, and then it writes the answer 1 token at a time, which we call decode. And right at the end, there's detokenizing and streaming, turning numbers back into text and pushing that down the wire to the person waiting. 6 stages: network, queue, prefill, decode, detokenize, stream. That's your whole map, and very nearly this entire course is about 2 of them. So why those 2 in particular? Because prefill and decode are so unlike each other that they may as well be running on separate machines. Prefill reads, your entire prompt arrives in one piece, the GPU sees every token in it simultaneously, and it gets through a genuinely enormous amount of work in parallel. It's expensive, but it's efficient, and the longer your prompt happens to be, the more there is to chew through. Decode writes. And how many tokens can decode give you at a time? Exactly 1. Why is that? Because the model has to see what it just said before it can work out what to say next. Token 50 needs token 49 to exist first, right? So you can't parallelize your way out of decode the way that you can with prefill. You just go around the loop again and again and again. That's probably the most important sentence in this episode. 1/2 of your request is a sprint that you run all at once and get to parallelize beautifully, and the other half is a queue of exactly 1 that you cannot hurry no matter how much hardware you throw underneath it. Now, what actually makes either of those halves slow? There are exactly 2 answers, and I promise that isn't me simplifying for television. Either you're waiting on arithmetic, which needs compute, or you're waiting on memory. So which is it? Waiting on arithmetic means the cores are genuinely busy doing the multiplications, and the work itself is the thing you're queued behind. We call that compute bound, and prefill is usually where you'll meet it. Waiting on memory means those same cores are sitting idle while the weights get dragged out of memory and into the chip. That's memory bandwidth bound, and decode lives there almost permanently. Because think about what decode is really doing here. For every single token it produces, it drags the entire model across that bus and then uses it exactly once, right? This is the bit I'd really like you to hold on to. Almost everything you've ever heard about making models faster is one of those 2 things, right? You're either doing less arithmetic or you're moving fewer bytes. We do that arithmetic properly in episode 8. For now, I'd just like you in the habit of asking which of the 2 walls you're actually standing in front of, because most teams reach for a fix long before they have asked the question. Okay, so if that's the shape of it, what do you actually measure? 4 numbers, and you live with these for the rest of the course. The first is time to first token. That's how long from your user hitting enter to the very first word landing on their screen. It's Q plus prefill added together, right? And it's the number your user feels most sharply because it's the stretch where their screen is doing absolutely nothing at all. The second is inter-token latency. Once the words are appearing, how long between them? A stutter there reads to your user as the model struggling to think even when your total time is perfectly reasonable, which is why an average on its own will hide the thing your users are actually complaining about. The third is throughput. And throughput isn't about your one user at all. How many requests does your whole system finish per second? That's the number your capacity planning and very nearly all of your cost modeling runs on. And I want to be careful with you here because those last two pull directly against each other. And that is exactly the trap I watched a good team walk straight into last year. Which brings me to the fourth number. And it's the one that almost nobody puts on a dashboard. Goodput. So what's the difference between the two? Throughput counts every single request you manage to finish. Goodput counts only the ones you finished quickly enough to still be worth something to the person who was waiting. If a response arrives after your user has given up and closed the tab, your throughput graph still counts it, right? It still looks perfectly healthy. It just didn't help anybody. So when the throughput number looks wonderful and your users are somehow still complaining at you, I'd say 9 times out of 10, this is the number that nobody was watching. Put it on your dashboard now while everything is calm, rather than in the week you suddenly need it. Now here's the promise for the rest of this course, and it's a specific one. By the end, you'll run all of this as a decision tree. Slow first token, go and look at your queuing and your prefill. Slow between tokens, that's bandwidth and batch size. Both of those healthy, but the bill is frightening. Then you're having a scheduling and utilization conversation, and that's a different chapter entirely. Symptom first, then cause. And isn't that exactly the shape of the question you get asked in an interview? And can I tell you what we are not doing? Because I think that's just as useful to you as the list of what we are. We're not training models. Training and fine-tuning are a genuinely different discipline, and they belong to somebody else's course. We're not covering retrieval quality, or prompt design, or how your agent decides what to do next. All of that is real and genuinely difficult work that somebody on your team has to do properly, and none of it whatsoever is what we're doing here. This course starts at the moment the model already exists and a request has arrived, right? Everything from that point on is ours. So here's the one thing I'd like you to go and do before the next episode. Open whatever you're running in production and find out whether you can even see those 4 numbers. Most people discover they've got throughput and nothing else at all. That isn't a failure, by the way. And I'd rather you didn't read it as one, because it is simply where almost every team I've worked with started out. Because there's a request sitting in your system right now, waiting in a queue. How long has it been there? That's rather the point, isn't it? Nobody currently knows. Next time we follow one single request from the HTTP call all the way to the first token on the screen, and we find out how much of that journey isn't the model at all. See you there.